thank you for coming. We're going to try to kick off in time because we've got loads to say, and we also want to give you the possibility to say a lot. I need to start with some housekeeping. So what you see there doesn't really reflect who we are here. We're not cheating. It's that unfortunately Frank couldn't make it, but Michael kindly, very, very kindly accepted to step up at quite a last minute. So this is going to be even more enjoyable because there is some unpredictability in the panel, which I consider to be one of the triggers of a very lively discussion. The way we're going to structure it is we're going to have a couple of rounds of interaction in the panel, and then we're going to open for questions, and we hope to have as much conversation as possible with you. After a little bit of a framing of why this matters, why this is important, etc., we're going to shift to what kind of practical, concrete solutions and next steps we can adopt. What do we need? Do we have what we need? What's missing? And how to get there, so that everybody leaves the room with some concrete ideas, hopefully. So, as a matter of introduction, sorry, I should have said this first. Maria Luisa Stasi, I'm a competition lawyer by background. I work for the free speech organization Article 19, and I've been invited to moderate these discussions. And together with us, well, we have Natalie, distinguished university professor of law and digital technology at the University of Amsterdam, scientific director of AlgoSoc. By the way, there is a award ceremony immediately afterwards. So if you have time, join us there as well. Co-founder of AI Media and Democracy Lab, and so on and so forth. So definitely someone who knows a lot about what academic freedom is and what we need. Following, we have Cecilia, associate professor in economics and head of research at the IIPP at the UCL. Long academic journey in between, two sides of the Atlantic, between Argentina, UK. So yeah, probably you have a very good perspective of what that means in different contexts. Every time someone asks me what your focus is, I say, well, she put it on the title of her book in 2021, and I'll stick to that. So capitalism, power, and innovation. Intellectual monopoly capitalism. Deal with that. Michael, as I said, great initiative and courage, brave, joined us at the last minute, UCL as well. Probably one of the first researchers, so in my empirical experience, they was extremely focused in the intersection of human and computer interaction. Great job in bringing the technological and the legal community together and having a conversation and possibly understanding each other as well. Not all the time, but sometimes. And a privacy advocate, again, empirical experience. Welcome and thank you again. And then last but not least, Vladimir, to bring us back outside of the academic bubble into the market and what can actually be done to sort of solve the issues that we have. Program manager at SURF. His focus is on innovation and how technology can facilitate innovation and public values in specific sectors, including education. So I'm gonna spend a couple of words of introduction, but I sort of assume that if you are in the room, you know what academic freedom is and why it matters. So I'm not gonna go into that. What I'm gonna just try to do is to remind us of three things. The first one is that the concept of academic freedom dates centuries ago. So not decades, centuries. It came even before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and so on and so forth. But yet, is still not a given in society. If anything, the last, 24 months have shown that academic freedom is something that, if not sustained, can disappear in a blink, or can be made disappear in a blink. So I would say this is a work in progress. It's always a consistent work in progress. And it's a work in progress that where we are all involved. Because the second point I want to raise is when we talk about academic freedom, it's not about academics. I mean, it is also about academics, but it's not about the comfort of a teacher or a student to say what they want. It's about the benefits that this brings to society. Because we have teachers and academics and researchers because we want to advance in knowledge. And the way we advance in knowledge is if inquiry is free from any kind of influence and restraints, coming from the state, from the church, from the institution, from corporate power. The third thing I want to say is that usually when we think about this, we think about the level of output. And so we had already in the past a lot of discussions about how technology influenced this. Today there are discussions about, shall we use or not use generative AI in the output and so on. Valid conversations. What I don't think we are discussing enough is not the output level, but is the production environment for research and researchers. And so when we talk about academic freedom and a big tech, the easiest way is to look at where the money goes and so on and so forth. It's problematic, but it's the easy part. The uneasy part is the hidden influence and constraints that are put by the control of the production environment or ecosystem. We can use, as long as we understand each other, we can use different words. So with this as a background, I don't want to take any other time from the contribution of our speakers. So I'm going to start with Cecilia. So as I said, you have experiences here and there. So you probably have your own idea about what academic freedom is, what university, autonomy for university could mean, and what do we need for that. 5 minutes for you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I have a disclaimer actually to make, which is in my past life, before that book, I did my PhD thesis on university autonomy. And when I explain this, many of you will understand also why I say the things that I say these days about topics related to big tech, corporate power, and so on. And one of the things that I did for my PhD thesis in economics was to try to untangle these different and coexisting meanings of universities' autonomy throughout history, and how it started as actually autonomy as a corporation, which means self-governance, the capacity to decide how education takes place. In the beginning, in the Middle Ages, there were examples of universities that were even governed by the students, something that today would seem crazy. But something in between is what happened around a century ago, and since then in Argentina, after what is called the Reforma del 18, the 1918 reform. Since that moment onwards, there is a form of governance of the public university in Argentina that is run together by students, faculty, and graduates, so alumni. But this is one side of the university. And although in the Middle Ages, it was what people understood by autonomy, the autonomy of the corporation, of a guild to govern itself, then this moved over time with the Humboldtian University in particular towards the idea of autonomy of reason, connecting to Bildung, connected to a process of continuous learning, and the maturity of the human being understood as being part of its society, human capable of thinking critically. And I think this is something I would like to come back to later. But I also want to add what today features more prominently when we think about universities' autonomy, and this is financial autonomy. This is making money. So from a time when the discussion about autonomy was about governance, was about democracy, was the most democratic way to govern the higher education, or what today we call higher education, and a time when what was the most important was to actually reflect on this idea of autonomy of reason, connected, of course, with the Western Enlightenment, we live at a time in which the centrality of financial autonomy explains, in part, why universities today have been mostly captured by big corporations, among them big tech companies, when they are doing research. And this has multiple narratives, some of them more obvious, like the idea of creating the market university, academic capitalism, which are different ways of saying us as scholars, we're not creating value for society when we teach or when we reflect on ideas. The only way to create value for society is to create economic value. And therefore, we either need to sell what we are doing, patent what we are doing, give away what we are doing to companies. But ultimately, behind this idea, of course, there is also another dimension of the university autonomy as it is understood, for instance, in Argentina, which is the idea of co-production of knowledge with other parts of our society. And that, of course, is critical and relevant. But the way in which this commodification of research has taken place is simply a process in which the university co-produce knowledge with others. Those others can be many, but ultimately those profiting from that co-produced knowledge and those that define the research questions are a few. And those few are the most powerful corporations in the world. And I think that and I will finish with this slide and then in the next questions come back to the next things, but if I'm within my 5 minutes, I want to say 2 more words about what is there on the slide, the national innovation system and the idea of invention different from innovation. So typically within economics, this would even be understood as notions that come from critical economic thinking. But I think that they have hijacked our possibility to understand the processes of appropriation of knowledge, of monetization of knowledge. Why? Because the idea of the national innovation system is not only ill-equipped when we think of knowledge co-production from the Middle Ages onwards, which has always been international, but also, and the most important problem is that it sidelines, if not completely hides power relations. The fact that when we are setting a research agenda, when we are defining a priority, when we are defining who will be able to benefit from the result, not everyone is equal. Not every actor within that national innovation system will have the same chances to decide or to even be invited to the decision-making table. And the other point is that when we make this split between invention and innovation, we, in a way, forget the history of the production of knowledge and how knowledge is the only product in our world that is produced with the same input that its output represents, because we produce knowledge with knowledge. And producing knowledge is also, at the same time, a process and a product. So this to emphasize that this distinction between invention and innovation basically facilitates the idea that the innovators are big tech companies, for instance, that the innovators are big pharma companies, that the innovators are all the big companies, or sometimes not necessarily big, but all those that end up profiting from the innovation, all those that patent the innovation or that keep it secret, forgetting about the history of that knowledge and how it is always co-produced by many and then more and more appropriated by a few. So yeah, this is an intro remark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Natalie, I turn to you. It seems to me that one of the most vocal universities when it comes to maintaining this autonomy and trying to find an alternative has been the University of Amsterdam. So you come from there. I don't know, I'm very interested in your experience so far. What do you think are the major challenges and the major obstacles to start with? And then we think about solutions.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think Cecilia already very much highlighted and you also, importance of academic freedom and autonomy and how much this is more and more being capsized also and captured by economic companies, which is for universities, of course, also a reason to very seriously think about to what extent we depend actually on these companies are able to make autonomous choices. And I think that is a point that you in your research make also really clear. I would like to touch upon a bit different perspective, and to that I need to give you a bit of background. So I'm the director of the ALGOSOC program, Public Values in the Algorithmic Society, which is a research program funded by the Dutch government from 5 universities and more than 70 researchers, all doing research into how digital technology change societal institutions like courts, like the media, like health, hospitals. And what are the inherent values and also power dynamics we see. And doing this research with the team, we started to realize 3 things. First of all, through our research, we saw how big the problem is, how deeply core societal institutions, democratic institutions, are dependent on a handful of commercial companies. And this is nothing new to you, but if you do research on that on a daily basis, you start understanding how transformational this development is. This leads me to secondly, this is not only deeply concerning on a research and societal level, but it also makes you understand how much this is a collective action problem that we are so dependent. And how digital sovereignty dies on a daily basis through thousands of acts of convenience and choices, including choices of us, academic institutions and universities. And it is an uncomfortable truth, but universities and our tech choices are also part of the problem, and that has gotten us into this dependency. And that leads me to the third point, and you talked about production environments, Isa. We, in our research, also use all these digital technologies, right? We use computational methods. We use the autonomic transcription in Zoom. We use OpenAI to do our literature research. We store our cloud, our data in Azure and AWS. And we know that these technologies have values. And these are values that are not aligned with a lot of academic values. And this all led us and the consortium to the realization that it's kind of hypocritical if we sound the alarm as researchers in all our publications without drawing the consequences. And this is why 3 years ago, we as a consortium decided that we go into search for alternatives. So because we're 5 universities, leading big universities in the Netherlands, we are quite a sizable mess. And we thought we joined forces with SURF and start a pilot with Nextcloud. And I think Vladimir will tell us a bit more about what Nextcloud is. But what was important for us in this choice, and maybe also should mention that I was very much inspired by Michael also, who actually really brought me on Nextcloud as an idea. And why Nextcloud? A couple of things. First of all, this is a technology based in Europe, open source, where digital autonomy and privacy are explicit design goals, unless with other big technology companies we know of. But also because they were willing to actively work with us and pick up the phone and talk to us and help design the technology in a way that works for us researchers and our values. And this was a really important point for us. And through this pilot, we were then also able to give feedback to Nextcloud to help improve it. I'm not saying it was an easy ride, definitely not. And I'm happy to share my experience if we have time, what works, what doesn't work, what we bump into it, and how we try to overcome it. Just as a concluding remark, it took us almost 2 years to only get to this pilot. Why? Because it was a small-scale pilot, but it had to go through the exactly same university processes like large software packages that are rolled out university-wide. Extremely complex approval processes with privacy lawyers, information security specialists, IT managers, departmental managers, data protection officers. If you know how a university works, you have some idea of how long this takes if a university is not prepared for this transition. So, and I must say the University of Amsterdam invested a lot of resources to make this work. And then doing this across 5 universities adds an extra layer of everything by 5 multiplied to this process. But we've made it, and the Nextcloud pilot is running for a year now already, and I'm very happy to share experiences how that goes.
Thank you, Natalie. Hopefully we're going to have time to hear how this goes. Vladimir, I'll turn to you, because for now we've spoken mostly about the demand. But now we turn to the sort of supply side. So what's available out there, and how do you see from a sort of a market perspective or provider perspective the challenges in working with the education sector, with universities?
Yes, it's challenges, but it's also rewarding. So if you look at the digitalization, for instance, as discussed, Nextcloud is a collaboration software. So you may see it as a bit of the Microsoft Office suite in the mix with communications and chats, that sort of. So it sounds really cloud. It's also about storage, but it's about collaboration. And you can have multiple looks on it. You can, I think we're very good at looking at the price and looking what requirements and have a lawful procurement. So these are things we already taken into account, I think, for a long time now, and doing quite well, looking at prices and looking at functionality. But I think the key, and that goes for maybe the whole sessions, it's about the values that we're trying to protect and fight for. And I don't want to cause any troubles. Privacy is just one value, a very important one, a very well pursued one with lots of people working on it. But it's just one value. So the freedom of choice is one. The sustainability was brought up this morning. So how can we get those values into these products if you don't have any say. So that's maybe also a key factor. You got to have a say. So a bit on the words, and I think you made a beautiful intro. We can have 1,000 discussions and a beautiful bit of history on autonomy. So the digital sovereignty, don't get mad at each other, understand each other well enough. So I think I see autonomy as a value, and that can be divided in personal autonomy, professional autonomy of a continent. So there's more up to it, but I don't think digital sovereignty is being a 0 or a 1. But you could have a say, you can steer, you can have your own innovative power instead of giving that innovative power to an external company or another country. You're in control. So I think see it as that. It's not the same as a state-like or a political sovereignty where it's about taxes and border protection and that sort of thing. Saying that, what I'm trying or what we are trying, and that's why I really like/love AlgoSoc consortium, is that they try to have these values where they say, okay, these are important. How can we get that into this digital environment, from storage to algorithms to software to procedures? And that is what you have tried to do, and that's quite difficult. So putting those values in your digital systems, in your digital ecosystems. Because we're coming from a situation that we're not in control. So we have, this is an example. I can make the same drawing with Springer or Adobe or other companies. So you have on the one hand companies that are supplying beautiful software that is interoperable within a supplier. So it works flawless, you get a low price, and IT management love it because you get only one invoice. But it's not open to the out, and that is one of these academic freedom important parts. Can we work with each other? So digital sovereignty sounds nationalistic or sounds protectionistic, but it's the other way around. It's the open hand to the other. So this is a common ecosystem on my machine, for instance, I think in the public sector in the Netherlands. So people want to say, oh, I will leave with my email, I will go somewhere else, I will go to Nextcloud. But then you have something like identity management pulling you back again onto all these other layers. Or you say, okay, I want to use AI for my CRM, but not for my cloud-based stuff. And yeah, so that is kind of tricky. But you also should take into account why it's difficult. It's not only about the tools, so IT, a system, a hyperscaler, or I'll give an example, MS Teams. It's also about the change of not only this vertical integration, but also horizontal integration. So also data and content. And now we're in a slippery slope. So it's not only providing tools, but it's also providing what are we learning, what is the research about. And of course, LinkedIn is well known. That's for this supplier, something that can be connected to your email. GitHub for the development, and learning accelerators is about the content of what young children are learning by the same company that's providing the tool. So a lot of issues. This morning, somebody said, yeah, we need freedom of choice, and I want to scale up and grow. I understand that, but freedom of choice is not the same as autonomy. So these are the 80 Copilot variants. So you have freedom of choice, case closed. It's not the same. So I'll give one example, what you can do. For instance, I think all of us don't like the AI ecosystem at the moment. Not talking about AI or if it's good or for our creativity or for our children, but I don't think we like the AI ecosystem not being democratically ruled. A few people rule that thing. So we are trying to pull those layers again apart from each other. So you have these applications, for instance, Nextcloud. You have all these models, every day growing new models, so the generative AI, and those models are located on physical infrastructure. It can be in America, can be in Europe, can be in your own data center. And what we need, so I don't have 600 billion, and AlgoSoc is also not providing me that, so I can't make a new open AI company, but what we can do with each other is make a strategic layer and say, okay, please connect to the layer, to the hub, and we can have there normation, freedom of choice, new guardrails, GDPR compliance, AI Act compliance. So we can do a lot with each other, but the magic word here is open, and the second one is collectivity. And that's why I think we're in a good audience on thinking about what is needed for that openness and that collectivity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Inspiring. Michael, we have put already a lot on the table. I'm aware of this. So I've a bit just very curious to pick your mind. But also, I think I've heard already some keywords like co-design, collaboration, open, collectivity, feedback.
Yeah.
One thing that remains in my mind is it's very, very difficult to think of knowledge center or university as, or to better say, knowledge centers and universities as having all the same need. So to a certain extent, this collaboration and this sophistication needs to lead also to sort of a tailored solutions. And so on the university side, you need people to be able to input on the tech side of it as well and say, those are our tech needs, not just, the values. I wonder if this kind of interaction is possible, easy, how is going?
Yeah, certainly. That's a really good provocation. So we have to zoom out and think a bit about the broader platform business model and also the software as a service business model. It's been alluded to by speakers beforehand, I think. And a lot of this is providing a product. It's quite static. It's sold on the margins, often quite cheaply. But the idea of modern software development has a sort of darker side, which is your organization is expected to conform to the shape of the software rather than the software conforming to the shape of your organization. This is a classic problem. It was called doing that kind of thing was seen as a solution to what used to be called in the early 1990s swivel chair automation, where you would actually just try and automate, but you just replace the human. You wouldn't rethink about the task entirely. But the problem is, instead of rethinking about the task, which would be a great prompt for a university to do, we rethink, but we're forced to adapt to what Office 365 or so on understands the task to be. We work in teams, and these teams have little chat channels and so on. And this might not be the best way that an organization actually works together in that kind of manner, for example. So software engineering has a challenge around this because you can't add infinite diversity. If you do so, you get infinite technical debt and the cost spirals and so on. But that, I think we've gone far too far in the other direction. So how do we get to a situation where an organization, particularly a university, a very unique type of organization, can define its needs? Now, a challenge here is from a couple of different directions. There are challenges. One is that it's really hard for anybody in 2026 to define their technological needs because we've lost a lot of imagination about what computing can do. People see what computing can do through the framing of what platforms have provided. So they look at platforms, they say, well, computing, video calls can look like this. People don't really think quite out the box and think, wow, this computer could really do anything if I asked it to. We could rearrange it and have any kind of agreement or arrangement, and then we could see if it's possible. So we've got this challenge of our starting point. Politicians have also failed us on this manner. That's why we have the DSA or something, which says, have the status quo, but we'll just add a few obligations and they can tweak a few knobs and so on. And so a lot of this is their initial problem. Secondly, in a university, academic input into things is very important. Academics didn't used to be interested in feeding into software, at least not in general. One reason is they saw it as a sort of back office thing someone else was going to do. But now it's becoming very clear to many academics that it's coming not necessarily for their lunch, but it's coming to mess with qualitative text, which is their kind of domain of thinking. Our domain, I'm an academic here. And also more and more in terms of the substance of content they might be creating or navigating or negotiating with. At UCL, this came to a head fairly recently in academic governance terms. I won't go into huge details, but a tool for sort of providing some feedback on the structure of students' writing led to a lot of controversy at our main kind of academic governance setup where Professoria and elected other members meet. It's a very big meeting, these sort of 500 people Zoom meetings that are a bit unwieldy. And people got very anxious and they thought this should have been brought through all the academic governance processes. And maybe it should have done, but software's never been brought that way before. And I unfortunately put my hand up and now I'm in charge of writing a series of principles for how academic input should happen in terms of software as a process. So I'm pleased to send answers on a postcard for that. However, the broad question remains is that when you have people who are time poor, but also quite imagination poor in relation to the potential of computing. How do you engage, really get input about the potential structure of their task, back and forth? What does that process look like? How is that process high quality and meaningful? And this is not asking people what they think of 2FA or something like this. This is asking people what they think about the structure of the tools that are at their disposal. So this would all be nice, and I've got some happy news. I really think that there is some promise and hope from an unsuspecting quarter, and that is generative AI. Because actually AI coding in upending the software as a service model may provide a lot of power to open source providers to make software that is judged by people based on the fit to the organizational needs more than some big flashy open-ended technology. I'm not saying AI is going to make some magic technology we've never seen before, but there was a genuine problem where there was stuff we knew how to do, but we just couldn't pay and find the time to adjust software to have quite obvious functionality we've been able to do for 20 years, and to do it well and reliably. Now, universities struggled. SURF is actually a notable exception to this. Around the world, universities do struggle to work together to do development on their own and so on. But I do think there's an element of customizability that we have to seize. Now, it's not going to happen naturally. It's not going to happen on its own. I think we risk, by playing with that fire, that we get eaten by a different kind of platform model. So we've got to be quite firm and say, when we see new technologies and opportunities, to judge innovation based on the fit to the task, we take them and we work out how best to implement them. So there's various other stuff that we can talk about, and I'll chat about that more in the next reflection or questions. But certainly, I think there's room for hope, but the core is, let's start judging innovation based on how well it fits to our needs, not how shiny it is. Because ultimately, it's a very social and organizational process, especially around navigating software in the platform age.
I do endorse what you said, but I mean, the last thing, to start with, the last thing, let's think about the kind of innovation we need. And I'm going to open to all of you to sort of react and interact, maybe just adding a couple of prompts, things that we haven't touched upon, and maybe we want to do it in this next round. So one thing is the economic dimension of all this. Because Cecilia was making reference to the fact that there is a sort of an economic appropriation of the outputs. But here, when we're talking about sort of a redesigning and reshaping this production environment, this has some costs for the universities. And so we probably need to give attention to this dimension and figure out if this is doable, it's not doable, if it's reasonable, where the funding needs to come from. There seems to me, it seems that when we talk about sovereignty or autonomy, etc., and when we talk about switching from the hyperscalers to anybody else, the costs are factored in, and they weight the economic cost. They weight way more than the possible protection of other values. So I think we need to still agree on the priority list there and find a way to sort of deal with the economic costs of it collectively as a society. There is another point, which is if we look out there and the way the market works and demand and supply, they work at the moment, do we have specific policy or regulatory tools that we could use to make all this happen in a smooth way, rather than having to sort of create enlightened groups of people that have a long struggle ahead, and they try to lead the way regardless or against the stream, while probably ideally what we should work for is working within the stream and safeguarding this without all these hurdles and struggles. I'm saying this because I've heard a lot of time that there are dependencies, that is about innovation, and those are the key words for many regulatory frameworks at the moment. So
I can start with connecting the two parts of this story in a way, which for me are never about supply and demand, are more about production networks and who is where and how and who co-produces and for what purposes. Because actually we cannot think of independent markets in today's economy. So, and also more often than not, what happens is that because we have value chains, platforms, and franchising models. In all these cases, we actually have planning relations, planning beyond ownership. So they seem to be like supply, demand, a market, but actually they don't work like that. They work as one side of the story, setting the terms of how the whole process will take place. And this also impacts the other side of where because university autonomy is not just the autonomy to choose what software we use and why and for what purposes or what AI model we will be using, but it's also about the research questions that the computer scientists are asking themselves. And not only because AI is being used as a method of invention, we are pushed from every single discipline to use AI in our research. So basically, the problem that we are facing is that we do have the capabilities and the talent. The people that could be doing even the AI models, the frontier AI models, these are not just people hired by Google, Amazon, Microsoft, or the leading AI startups. Thousands of academics contribute to their innovation networks, and they do it, some of them based at our same universities in our countries. These people could not only be producing AI or different type of digital technologies for their universities, tailor-made or customized according to what collectively the scholars, the students, administrators of the university and so on think, but they could also actually be pursuing an even more important goal, which is to try to produce digital technology that serves the majorities and not the money. And that also remains within planetary boundaries. So I think that the constraint that we face is a two-side constraint. And we end up, in a way, confusing where our problem is. Because we do have the capabilities. We do have in the public space thousands of people that could be developing technology differently. I of course agree that usually there is also a confusion between how public institutions should be run. Efficiency now is seen to be the value that should guide every single institution. But one thing is a private company and a different thing is a public institution. A hospital, the priority of the hospital is to treat people, not to be more efficient, reduce costs, and no matter what cost in terms of healthcare. The priority of a school is not to be more efficient, is to learn, is to teach and learn also even for the teachers, but to teach new generations how to think by themselves. What an important task at a time when, if we outsource our capacity to think to generative AI, then we limit our own creative thinking. And it's not me saying this. There is even a Microsoft research paper that confirms that more confidence in generative AI leads to less critical thinking. And so certainly we will not have the political imagination. Certainly we will not have the guts to do it. Because part of our dependence is also an epistemic dependence, it's an ontological dependence. And this is why I was highlighting these frameworks that sometimes need to be very friendly, like the National Innovation System. We all work together and within the nation and we try to innovate and so on. And because the aim is that innovation then will result in economic growth, and then that economic growth will result in a better life for the majorities. But while we keep on repeating this recipe, we not only neglect the power relations, but we also forget about the actual goals. The goal was never growth. The goal was never efficiency. The goal is to ensure that everyone can live a good life within planetary boundaries, which also goes back to our responsibility when we think in terms of autonomy. When we democratize the capacity to decide the type of technology that we can get. And for me, digital autonomy is precisely about that. It's not about saying everything needs to be done inside Europe or everything needs to be public or everything. No, it's about, and I liked a lot what you were saying, Vladimir, it's about who is in control. Because these are control technologies. The discussion is about who decides what technologies we get, what technologies the schools get, universities get. And for that, we also need to think about the dependencies inside academia of the scholars themselves, not only from computer science, and I finish here, but also from other disciplines, and how even colleagues from the humanities and social sciences are contributing to these predatory ecosystems in which decision-making power is concentrated in a handful of white men from the US and secondarily China and so on.
Yeah. So I would like to add on the first, on the first part or the question on where does the money come from or how we're going to pay the financial incentive. I don't have the answer for that, but what I do know is we need to speak up. So I talk to board members, I talk to IT directors, and of course they want to be in control of their university in 2030. So nobody says, oh, I don't care, and I will let the app store judge which applications my student can use. They want to be in control. But I think what we should do, and also making a plea to you on all level, personal level, or in your team, to your board. So if you speak up, where do you want to go? And why is that university, why does it exist? And it doesn't have to be tomorrow or in 5 years, take 10 years. And then you will see, and we will see with each other where the money comes from. Maybe the banks will say, oh, if you want to make Nextcloud even better than Microsoft, great, here is some money, do it. Or young people will say, oh, I would like to love and work on values instead of shareholders. But you need to speak up. What is the point in the future? Where do we want to go? And nobody will get mad if in 2030 you're not exactly there where you said you wanted to be, but not speaking up loud because you don't see the FTE and you don't see the money and you don't know European hyperscalers. It won't exist. And I think we are the only, so research and academia is the only sector I can think of in the world that has the ability to adapt that friction and take heart. That's what Algosok is doing. It's not always fun, but somebody has got to do it. The kindergarten teacher is not going to do it. The police is not going to do it. So we are the only people, I think, who can take upon this task to have this transition, of this change. So speak up would be the first part, to find the money somewhere.
I'm going to be with you on this, so counts on civil society as well, not
Yep,
only
exactly,
the academy.
Exactly. No, fair point.
Natalie, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I really like this point about imagination and imagination, how it else could be. And to some extent, I do think that the whole dependency narratives is to some extent also backfiring here. Because if you hear on a daily basis that you are so terribly dependent on all these companies, at a certain point, it does not even enter your imagination that there is something else. So as important as it is to make this point again and again, you would be surprised how many people still don't get it. It is also creating this sense of fatalism and lack of choice. And I think this is something that we really need to be seriously aware of, because we do have a choice. And that's the second moment. I think at the moment we're at some kind of this matrix moment. You have these two pills and then you finally take it like Neo, and then you actually realize that what you see is pretty bleak, because we simply have failed to invest in infrastructure for the past decade, because there were always these convenient and almost free solutions that are not free and so far. So the reality is that we need to find the money, because developing alternatives takes money. It really takes money, not only the technical solutions, but that's what we see also with this Nextcloud pilot. Transitioning is only the first step. You then need to invest in tech support, in someone who answers all these phone calls from panicked colleagues that have no clue where the button is. You need people who actually dedicate a lot of their time in continuously reminding the others that we know we're not going to have a Zoom call, we're going to have a talk call. And I can't tell you how much energy this costs to beat the default. So the truth is, yes, we have a choice. Yes, we need to speak up. And yes, we have to invest. And the drama is that investing in infrastructure is politically never very popular, because it's long-term thinking, it's long-term investments, and not something that one party can easily write on their flags. But it's the only option. It's really the only option. That's so I think what we really should talk more. I mean, at the moment we talk a lot about gigafactories and how to stimulate more AI development. We much talk less about how to incentivize the public interest tech, but also the deployment of public interest tech and financing what it takes to deploy public interest tech. So I think we really need dedicated digital autonomy budgets. That's the only way forward. And a lot of organizational innovation as well.
I agree. I would be a word of caution there. As long as we call it digital autonomy and we go for digital autonomy. If the moment it becomes digital sovereignty or whatever else is under that umbrella, then it's just no. I know, but the conversation is, as you said, it's very unpopular to build an infrastructure.
Yeah.
But then if you adopt a narrative that is about security and securitization, then suddenly there is a lot of money to be spent. So we need to sort of re-bring this on track, I think. Michael, before we open.
Just a short point reflecting on some of this. The unfortunate thing with this is that we have to go deeper in infrastructural governance than even we've been talking about, because there's a few changes happening at the moment. So a university is, not every university is, but typically somewhere which has quite open doors. People can sort of wander in, and students can come and they can connect their own devices, and that causes a lot of headaches for everybody because corporations, you can't just walk into KPMG and just connect your phone. You can't connect to the projector. Everything is very locked down. And that's for reasons of serious security a lot of the time. And universities have to live in a world where it's a kind of an open door policy to some degree, and that there are serious concerns for academic freedom by having heightened surveillance on devices, for example. And so there's always trade-offs there. So that's the first step. But unfortunately, what's happening now, given AI and a sort of increase in ability to abuse systems at scale using AI, misuse and so on, we're seeing a move to more and more hardware control. And it's a fundamental challenge to a lot of the openness of technology today. So on everybody's phone, if it's a modern phone from any kind of provider, inside there's a set of cryptographic hardware. It's called a secure enclave or a trusted execution environment. And it's a piece of hardware that can attest things. It can say, this thing is true. This person hasn't altered their phone, for example, or something like this. And this is a very big source of fundamental power in the device. And it's where a lot of the power from the App Store and so on all kind of emanates from these technological chips that make it very difficult to say you can't install a new operating system on this device. It just wouldn't work. There's lots of reasons. I don't want to there's lots of chips that are contributing to this. But a consequence of this is that we're seeing with AI people, deep fake calling and everything, and this kind of general sense of insecurity around the world, that it's becoming the case that operating systems are seizing that moment for power. They're saying, well, we will assure you that your device hasn't been tampered with, and we will decide what software can run and can't run. And this is actually a very big threat to some of this openness and customizability. It was a classic threat. It's called trusted computing. There was an old proposal for Windows called Palladium, and it was the idea driven by rights holders in particular, who said, it's so easy to copy things now. We've got to be careful because we can't let people copy things on the films on the computer. So maybe the operating system should stop them. And now it's less about copyright, and it's now more about this general sense of insecurity and abuse. And I think we've got to be careful because the type of power that gets consolidated to deal with that challenge is exactly the kind of power that then stymies us with, say, federated ID systems and these things, which are the constant pain in the neck of anyone who wants to make a kind of set of open suite software that everyone connects through sort of Microsoft, or they don't really have a great alternative to a lot of these things. And if they do, insurers don't like it. So if they do, insurers won't give you a good rate and your organization's very big, it'll be very expensive. So I just say, a kind of note of caution, we have to go deeper, and that is unfortunate because, as Natalie said, it's hard to have those kind of conversations. It's hard to go get the excitement in the room and the buy-in for that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we have a very clear idea of what the challenges are, and also we've put, I think, on the table reasonable possible path to solve them. We open to the audience questions, especially if you can or if you want. We would be also very interested in hearing what's your experience, if the challenges are the same, if you have tested any possible solutions or have any suggestions on concrete steps that we can all sort of put in place. Yes, there is at the back, and then here at the second row.
Hi, thank you very much for the conversation. Yeah, I think that here we need brave leaders that are first movers. Like I just want to give the example of Pedro Sanchez and the stuff that is going on in Gaza and Iran and the US. First mover, and then other people follow. I think University of Amsterdam is doing a great job. Also, Jose van Dijk building a platform and so on. But then Francesca Bria also encourages regulators to really go to the end, to really invest in those native technologies. But the problem is also there are oligarchs here at home that are connected with oligarchs along the world, right? Capitalist. So I think also another problem that I saw and I heard from municipalities is that the ICT departments, they have a different view from the other people, and they just go to the easy solutions that are Microsoft and so on. So I think in my own experiences, I think that my supervisor, he told me that now in his classes, there are no laptops, no phones. This is what I used to have in my class. So we need more mandates. I think that we need to go back to the old school stuff, and this is what China is doing, for example. And I think that the figure of the teacher is becoming more like a clown, like a clown that has to engage students that have short-term memory and has to make quizzes and has to do lots of things. And for me, like a teacher, is just someone that is in front of the classroom and just give knowledge to the students. And the students ask questions and sometimes they have discussions. So I really don't like teaching right now because I want to do teaching in the old school, but all the teachers, they do the clown stuff. So, well, I think that mandates is just like good solutions and so on. Sorry.
Would you be okay if we collect a couple of questions before? Okay, so the second row here, she was waiting, and then I've seen a few more hands.
Hi, thank you for the panel. I'm Christina, also from the UVA. I have two questions like two little things. So one is about that we often elect software to support certain functions for us. So for example, we have embraced Figshare as an open source research data repository, although this is privately owned by a company that may not have such a big devotion, let's say, to this idea of open source. We also use Pure to register our research output, which does this really funky graphs that I don't understand. And it's useless, by the way. And this is actually really simple stuff, registering research output. Why do we have to use a commercial product? And where I'm heading is exactly to the question, what is the role of corporate ownership for ensuring that we get what we want and that it stays what we want in 10 years as well?
Maybe can I
Go for it, yes.
Thanks, Christina, who did an excellent report on this topic. That should be flagged by people. So look up UVA, Digital Sovereignty Universities, and you'll find it. Pure is pure by evil Dutch company Elsevier is a pure is a perfect example of I think what we can throw out the window. But the question is, what's the process to throwing it out? Now, I don't think if we throw it out the window, we sort of reclaim all the power and we actually live up to what Cecilia was saying with those parts. But actually, it's quite an interesting procedural thing to see what is it to never have that kind of thing again. Like, what kind of university would you need to make sure that you never buy what is basically a series of interlinked websites that are like with a weak database behind it, pay a huge amount of money to a publisher and get locked in. And that's again, we do that, we don't win 777 on the bingo and get, but we know then what to do. And I think those kind of questions, if we can work out why universities do that for a variety of contractual and other reasons, how we need to have the better solution that is there, glowing, open source, better financials behind it at the time to say, well, it's the obvious choice, that one, rather than these other ones, then we're getting somewhere. And I feel like we can work through those kind of examples, and hopefully we get rid of those, we'll be able to tackle the bigger questions more easily.
If I may, I slightly disagree in the point that we should not buy their narrative. Our job shouldn't be to try to push to have a cheaper solution, and because it's cheaper, then the university authority will adopt it. I mean, we can try, but above all, I think we need to push for a different narrative in which what is valuable by a university shouldn't be necessarily the cheapest, most cost-effective, alternative. In the case of Elsevier, it's like definitely is the craziest example of a process of intellectual monopolization, because we create the research, we assess the papers, then everything funded, or partly at least funded, let's say, with public money, but then we pay for accessing our own research. So clearly there we do have examples of journals, like I don't remember the name of the journal, but I do remember a few years ago, the whole editorial board of a very prestigious I think it was from biology, but STEAM journal left and started their own journal. And I think, and there are also examples of people that start journals that don't go through the big publishers. And I think that this also connects back to the discussion of university autonomy, to start to rethink about how to govern universities. And that includes from what software we are using, to how we define the research agenda, to what type of publications we want to promote. But I wanted to say something about the first question, or comment, which is the role of complicit actors. When I build on different research for analyzing today's capitalism, I prefer to talk or to build on dependency theory instead of, for instance, ideas of imperialism, colonialism, or even techno-feudalism for other reasons. But in all this, in the cases of imperialism, colonialism, and techno-feudalism, the problem is that we end up with a world that it's too simplified. We just have the bad guys and the rest. And we automatically think that all the rest are good because they are not the clearly identified bad guys. And in the dependency theory, on the other hand, there is this emphasis on how underdevelopment is also explained by the role of complicit actors in the peripheries, that instead of contributing to development, they profit from underdevelopment. At the time, to name names and make it more concrete, they were talking about the oligarchy from the mining sector, the agricultural sector, and so on. Today, we clearly need to add a whole set of actors. The problem is not that the companies that are locking us in are from the US. If we give all the same power to SAP, things will not be different because SAP is German. So I think that the problem is that algorithms are a rule, a way to govern. And we need to try to push from the university authorities to the students to realize that either we govern the type of algorithms we get, from the simplest one to AI, or those designing the algorithms will be governing us way beyond the technology that we use.
Maybe brief point on I totally agree with you on the governance, but I think something that universities are notoriously bad at is collaboration. And it's very fine if the University of Amsterdam does, but quite honestly, this is not going to revolutionize the world. But if we work together, then we're talking. And I think this is something that, and universities really have to realize we need to learn how to work together. It's ridiculous. I mean, we teach all these students teamwork and are not able to set up a pilot in less than 2 years together. So there's some serious work to be done.
Yeah. And there's also a bit of a paradox in that point. So I think this subject that we're talking today, and maybe for 1.5 years, it needs collective power. We need to work together. And so we need to give a bit of our individual autonomy away to gain greater autonomy, bigger, stronger, to fight these. And not only fight in a negative defensive way, but also taking chances, making things our way. So on a positive note, we will get more autonomy back. Maybe even the old student image that are controlling the university, maybe. But first of all, let's work together, and that also means you can't use your own color. If we say, okay, let's go for a green one, then you can't have an orange one, and we should accept that. So this fight is so big and so difficult and expensive, maybe, that we need to have another stance on what we have shown the last 15 years.
I'm very empathic to this call for collaborations, and I think once again I recognize a lot of dynamics within civil society as well. I still believe that this is part of the story and that it will remain an unfair fight unless we use the tools that we have to diminish the counter power on the other side. Because we can get together, but we're never going to be matching this. So we need both.
Yep.
But that's probably another conversation. I've seen so many hands raised. So 1, 2, 3, yes. We'll start with those 3.
Hi, I'm Alex Potts. I'm Data Protection Officer at UCL and also involved in a research project with Michael, who is an incredibly generous academic, as you can probably tell. My question is, I guess, for Natalie and Michael, but also all of the panel, in terms of the practicalities of this. So I think one thing that I've been at UCL for 7 years now, and the growth, the separation between professional services and academics, to be honest, only seems to be growing as the university grows. We become very, very separate. And so I think for Natalie, I'd love to know with University of Amsterdam and the collaboration, how you got the professional services on side. So in terms of IT, bring them on. We've certainly now having heads of IT who have never worked in the university sector before at all. And then Michael, we're incredibly lucky that you stuck your hand up in that academic governance meeting. But at the same time, what would we do if we didn't have you, just as a person to go, actually, I can help? So I guess from the academic side, how do we, from the professional services side, make sure that we are effectively engaging with academics and bringing on the academic voice when it is so necessary? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this great question. I think what has been crucial for making that possible at the university is that we had 2 people who really took on an ownership of this task. On our side, I was shocked it was Joris de Vries. And at the university side, the university actually dedicated manpower in the form of Frank van Tettenhoven, who really deserves a lot of credit here. Who also was high enough in the hierarchy to talk to everybody and get people to think not in terms of problems, but in terms of solutions. So this is the second thing. I mean, if you talk a lot to services, we immediately think of problems. We need to shift this mindset from how to solve them and make things possible. And I think what I saw at the University of Amsterdam, if you have someone who is dedicated, who has time to read it, and who has actually also the ear of the college, then surprisingly a lot of things can move.
So I think there's some dynamics that might work in our favor towards reducing this gap. And one of them is that the gap between IT professionals and then practitioners in an organization has been widened by what Tobias Fiebig and Seda Gerses have identified in their paper Heads in the Cloud, and also Seda Gerses' work with EDRI, that over time, people who were quite capable, flexible, problem-solving IT people have basically become Microsoft sleeper agents within organizations because of the way effectively, here, sure enough, it's very true. She's not a Microsoft sleeper agent, I could attest to. But the challenge of this is that, they see a problem and then they look for a sort of Microsoft-shaped tool. But what that means is you then over time, over multiple iterations of this game in people's career, lose trust that IT people can ever help you with anything because they're going to just tell you to adopt this thing that's the wrong fit for your task. So if we can get to a world where actually the processes are saying, yes, we've created an environment through all the challenges we've talked about where someone comes and they say, we want to do this thing, and maybe technology will be involved, and we can think what that would be like. We can think what would be a really good way to do that. We can have a process to come to that, and we can make it happen. Then I think you actually close that gap because you say, well, these are the people we need in the room, and we can start to have those collaborations. At the moment, the collaborations and the distance is there because we've got this elephant in the room in the middle that doesn't allow the fit, and then no one knows who to blame. And the answer is who to blame is the whole environmental situation because we've got, and that's why I disagree a little bit with what you said last, Maria, which is we can't take on the titans. I actually think we can because the one thing that platforms don't have is the ability to sell that close fit with the local institutional knowledge. They crave the ability to try and do that, but they do it through trying to coerce an organization. Actually, there is a massive value proposition in creating a system where our technology serves a purpose and works. And if we can account for that in costs and all the other things that may limit organizations, and if we can maybe change our mindset around that, which also might require anything from upheaving everything to just changing accounting rules as well and thinking about the longer term, all of this kind of stuff. we might be able to get somewhere and says, oh, actually, the valuable software is a software that works. We have a way to integrate that value into our thinking. And that value comes from breaking the system and working out how to work together.
Yeah. Can I make a practical, because now a problem occurs, so I can follow you and I can recognize it. So so you have this specific person who is willing to have an alternative for YouTube, PeerTube, or an alternative for Mastodon, Twitter or X, Mastodon. The existing solutions. So people are saying there are no solutions, we need to build, they are there. But somebody at the university will say, we're not going to do it. I don't have a privacy impact assessment. I don't have a security cleared. It's not ISO certified. So there's also, talking to the room, a bit to think about on, again, weighting these values of privacy and the GDPR. These are norms. I'm not trying to tamper with that. But there's also something in urgency on this freedom of choice or autonomy. So can we shift it a bit that somebody at a university who is willing to make a fit, give him some space to run a PeerTube service, and don't judge him or give him a penalty for doing so? And how can we solve that?
Say it quietly, but the APE isn't coming for you.
Okay.
I think that's the thing. There's organizational culture there as well.
Yeah.
I just to continue on what you were saying, I think that also there is where we can bridge the two parts. I think that Isa was trying to also bring into the conversation the role of the state in all this story. Not only funding universities, not only having dedicated lines of funding for universities to build their autonomy and so on, but also I think that clearly, a key priority for the public sector should be to have cybersecurity software, build the layers of data protection and so on. Because of course, and we know it, all the regulations, even if they harm a little bit the big players, are easier to comply for them than for any other alternative that may be developed or built or even imagined. So clearly, I think that it is there where we also find, okay, besides giving the money, besides regulating, what is the role of the public sector? And I think that it is also to create the public solutions where the solutions are not available and where there is no business case, if you want also, or even if there might be a business case, there is a tendency towards centralization and concentration of power. And there are state-owned companies like, I think that Europe has forgotten a bit the role of state-owned companies, while in Latin America, there are state-owned companies for many, many things, and they work fine. Of course, it might be that then you have a neoliberal government that starts defunding, that starts asking for more, but still with all that, there are many examples of companies that are even profitable. So I think that we can, in a way, learn from that to complete, if you want, the stack of the value chain. And that can solve a bit of that problem of what the trade-off, if you want, between the privacy and the autonomy.
Something that would have helped AlgoSoc a lot would have been some sort of pilot exception. And I mean, we talk a lot about these sandboxes and how they can be used by companies to comply with the laws. Why not have public interest sandboxes where you help public interest organizations to figure out how to explore alternatives? I think that would be really helpful.
Very good.
I see the conversation is already getting very heated here, but so I'm not going to steal any time. What I meant, yes, is the role of the public sector, but also as not only to bring its own alternative, but to create the space for diversity to be there. Because if we don't eliminate all this, the centralized power, it's very difficult to have a diverse environment there, and then we can sort of cherry pick what we actually need and what we want. There are at least two questions that I've no. One has already abandoned, so we go to...
Thank you. My name is Fanny. I'm a human rights lawyer working for a philanthropic organization. And I'd like to ask something different in the context of the title of the panel. I'm Hungarian. I listened to Orbán talking about sovereignty for 16 years. I'm pretty allergic to the term, but I can come on board with self-determination, choice, agency, both on the individual and the collective level. So the way I see the fundamental purposes of education is not just about the workforce development, but also people becoming social and political agents. And within that, there's critical thinking and collaboration, both of those you mentioned already. And what I would be interested to hear your observations is the status of the quote-unquote sovereignty, or in other words, let's say the ability of critical thinking, the ability of collaboration of your students in the era of more than 10, 15 years of the attention economy and let's say 3 years of large language models being mainstreamed.
We start with the negative approach, and then one of you is going to turn it on a positive approach.
Perfect. I can start. No, clear. I think I would say that there is heterogeneity. Some of us have the privilege to teach at universities that, especially at the master's level and so on, still have people that want to think by themselves. Of course, that doesn't mean that they're not using the LLMs or distracted with their phones, but I think that there is still room for expanding this creative and critical thinking. But precisely because of what you are saying, I think that our window of political opportunity to solve not only the major challenges of our time, but also to build these forms of university autonomy, social autonomy, you name it, are shrinking. Because basically, if what we need the most is this capacity to think outside of the box, solutions from problems and so on, all this is what we are losing through the attention economy, through the LLMs and so on. So definitely, if there is one word I can share with you, for me, is urgency. This is urgent. This is a priority beyond what it looks like just by looking at, oh, this is a problem of the universities. No, this is really, really urgent for our societies.
Yeah, and on a positive note, but well meant also. So last week in the US, there was a thing going on where graduation students are booing people who have a talk. And of course, somebody has to say something about AI, and the world will end if you don't use AI. And you see a growing crowd, and I think it's becoming a meme kind of thing, but booing people off stage when they're going with use AI or die stories. So I think, and also looking at the climate change generation protesting, so I have very good hope that youngsters are talking about values, talking about being allergic for nationalism or protectionism. And I think we can have a good conversation with them about this subject, not raising the finger or talking about open source, but what is important as a student. And I think they're maybe even more mature than the grown-ups on this subject. So I have very positive and good hope.
Yeah, a super quick short note. To kind of go back to the open source software point on that, open source software is often, because you're using multiple components, is a bit less seamless. And seamlessness is seen as quite a bad thing in human-computer interaction studies. Seamfulness is often seen as a very good thing, where you can sort of feel the seams between things, and it facilitates, in turn, critical thinking and understanding about how things fit together and how things could be otherwise. So that kind of approach to improve friction, to add some seams to our technology, doesn't mean they have to not work. It just means that we might know how they work rather than being optimized for attention and within all the same ecosystem, more fluidly considered a product. And who's the product then?
Good. I think we got almost to the end. I have one more thing left to say, which is I'm grateful because I think this is a very important conversation. I don't think this is as present as it should be at different tables. So I'm grateful for your contributions. I'm grateful for your time. I'm grateful for your contributions and your time. And I hope this is not the end. But I know that also one of us needs to go. So thank you very much. Thank you so much, everyone.